Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's interview on Talks with Julia, where we focus on topics that help you to achieve both personal and professional fulfillment at work. If this is your first time joining the live stream, I'm Julia Rock, your host and the head career coach and leadership development coach at Rock Career Development. And tonight, I'm so excited to welcome Cheronda Everett as our guest speaker. Cheronda is a good friend of mine, but she's also amazing. So before we get into the conversation with Cheronda, I want to tell you a little bit about her. So Cheronda is a grants expert currently working for the government, managing externally awarded grants to subrecipients. She has built a wide depth and breadth of experience in the grant space from her roles in both nonprofit organizations and higher education, which we will touch on a little bit tonight. And she also has over 18 years of project management experience, which has also enabled her to find career success. Welcome to the program, Cheronda. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, and it's the last day of Black History Month.
Yes. My
So,
head wrap.
got the head wrap. You really bringing it in right now. So thank you so much for being here, because I'm excited for us to talk a little bit about leveraging the transferable skills you have into different career changes and transitions. And you have a lot to share in terms of your ability to be able to make those kinds of moves. So kind of stepping into that topic for tonight, can you share a little bit about your career journey just for the folks who are listening?
Yes. So I actually started, and I don't often say this, but I actually started as a middle school teacher. I went to school. My first degree was in education, and I taught middle school for 2 years. The whole program, I knew it was not for me, but I stuck with it. Old school, date myself. They say you pick a job, you stick with it, and you just figure it out from there. So I started there, and then transitioned into nonprofits. And so I worked with the nonprofits under grants. So I was responsible for managing grants. My role was a grant funded role. And so I was managing a department that was grant funded. And then from there, I transitioned into higher ed. And I like to say I played a zigzag game between higher education and nonprofit. A lot of higher education institutions are nonprofit organizations, so it's a lot of similarities. They have mission statements, they have visions, they do fundraising, they have programs and services. So they are really similar, and they have a lot of overlap. And so I did that. And each time I was under grant sponsor programs, I couldn't get away from them. And so I was managing grants and doing grants and grant sponsor programs. And I stopped being on the administrative side of higher ed and spent about 5 years as a faculty member. And so I was a college professor, and I taught nonprofit courses. So I can't just get away from it. We talked about grants and fundraising, a few of the topics that I covered, nonprofit accounting. And when I came back to the higher ed administration side, that's when I was like, I don't know if I want to be here. I don't know if I want to be here. I don't know if I want to be in higher ed. And so I went on a little journey for 2 years trying to make that decision. And this year in 2024, I've been working for the government as a grants coordinator.
Man, and it sounds like you've had such a rich career. You've had some different opportunities. Like you said, you've kind of zigzagged back and forth, and then ultimately now you've landed in the government. And so I just wanted to kind of dig in a little bit more to what you just shared in terms of, how did you actually come to the decision to say, hey, I'm leaving here, I want to try my hand, even with the government now. How did you actually get to those decisions? Because I think people think you can, a job transition is just something that you decide overnight, and that's not usually the case.
So when it came to higher education and nonprofits, as I mentioned before, my roles were very similar. So my first role in nonprofits were working with high school students. And then one of my first roles in higher education was working with high school. It was actually working with high school students and getting them into higher ed and exposing them and having programs. And so it really had that part of it where I checked the box She's worked with high school students, and she understands managing a grant, documentation, having them sign in, and as well as developing programs. So when I mentioned that higher ed and nonprofit is very similar, because I was always under grant sponsored work, it's very similar to nonprofits. I always have a mission that I have to uphold. I always have information and data I have to collect and share out with someone. And so the movement for me between nonprofits and higher ed was really going to the same place, because it was really doing the same thing. It's just a different title. The pay was different, and so when I made those decisions to kind of jump back and forth, it honestly was really based on lifestyle. It was, I needed to be able to have more flexibility in work, because like I said, the roles were so similar. I was managing a program. I had services I had to deliver. I had a grant. I had a grant budget I had to stick to. And so it was really like, what position is going to provide me the best lifestyle? I was a mom. I was a young mom. I was a single mom. And so I was really looking for jobs that will allow me to, no one's going to blink an eye if I'm like, I'm off on Friday because I'm doing this with the kid. I don't have to hide that or scrunch. You know, they say, don't tell people about your personal life. Like, I needed a space that was going to be supportive of that. And so when I zigzagged between nonprofits and higher ed, it really was based on what's going to give me the most flexibility in the lifestyle that I needed to have. Yeah.
No, that's great. And you mentioned something, as you talk about the jobs being similar, you really talk about using some of the same skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times we feel like if you're switching between industries, that it's super earth shattering, and it's like, how do you position yourself? But you had already built up a certain skill set with the grants and everything like that. So making that transition, you're able to position yourself to say, these are the skills that I already bring to the table. This is the work that I've done. And so for folks who are listening, as you're thinking through your career transition, it may be that you're able to do similar type work in another industry. It may not be that you're fully pivoting to something completely different where you're not using any of the skills you've had. And so that's really the crux of this discussion is, what are those transferable skills that you can take someplace else, that, you know, whether it's soft skills or kind of technical or subject matter skills, like whether it is grant writing or what have you. So as you're listening tonight, think about, well, what are these skills that I have that can easily transition into a job in a new industry, but it may be a like type position or something similar where you can kind of ease into this new industry and then maybe try something else from there. So really love that. And so I wanted to also ask you, did you have to do any sort of research as you were getting prepared to make the transition? Because how did you really know that the roles were similar? Was there a way for you to research and get some perspective?
Yeah. So when I first went from higher education to nonprofits, my original goal was to actually go into the government sector. I fell in love with the government sector when I was like 20, 21. But being a young parent, and when you're first coming into that, like at the ground level, no experience, those are long days. When you are a paid employee working for elected officials, management analysts, or whatever, those you are at the bottom of the totem pole. You are there at 10 11 o'clock at night. You're at board. And my friend, she's stuck with that trajectory. And, you know, she'll be talking to me like she'll be at board meetings, like this board meeting started at 7 and they are still arguing with each other. And she had to stay, you know, it was a part of her position. And so for me being a young mom, it didn't work. And so I initially started doing research where I wasn't ready to go back to school yet. And I had this degree in education. And of course that I can easily did something with the government with that, but it's like, well, where else can I go? You know, corporate was I'm dating myself during that time. Corporate was looking at comms, business, and accounting majors. I don't know what they're looking at now, but it was comms, business, and accounting. That's what corporate wanted starting at the base level. And I didn't have that. And I really, that young, didn't know how to position an education degree. Now I can run circles around why this education degree matters in your field, in your workspace, but I didn't know. And when I was, you know, doing the research I could, And I almost think like a mentor. I was talking to someone, they told me about the first position I got with high school students. And it's like, well, kids, you could work at this nonprofit and I've always been good with money and numbers. It's just something that always has come natural to me. And so it's like, okay, here you go. Here's like a $50,000 budget. We supposed to had already spent this for 6 months, but we've done nothing. So figure it out. We need a report in a week. Like, wait, what? What's happening here? And so it was really by fire and trial and error. But I did when I went into nonprofits, I really landed there because I wanted the government, but it didn't provide the lifestyle at that lower level that I needed. And so poking around and talking to people and reading things landed me at nonprofits.
And I think that's an important point that sometimes we miss, right? That we think that the transition may be harder than it is, or we haven't really talked to anyone, we really haven't done the groundwork or the research to see what all is available to us in a new space. And like you said, you had a certain lifestyle that you wanted, and so you were willing to say, okay, what jobs can I give up? Or am I willing to give up because it's not going to deliver that? And what job can I find that's in alignment? So I really, really love that. And so one of the things that I wanted to dig into is now more of those transferable skills that you talked about, whether it whether it was going from the teaching to nonprofit and higher ed and then the government, the transferable skills are a huge part of that. So how did you personally assess some of those transferable skills you had to say, hey, this is a fit or not a fit? Like, did you look at job descriptions or anything? How did you do some of that assessment?
So for the first time, from doing middle school to working with high school students in a nonprofit setting, it really wasn't even me assessing those skills. It was more like a mentor, like, well, if you can do this, you can do that. And I was like, oh, if I can do this, I can do that. And when I was in undergrad, I've always worked office jobs. And so, which is so funny, most elementary education majors work with kids, and I was working in an office and being active in my college and being a president of different organizations. And so I had a lot of those just organizational skills, managing skills. I essentially was serving as a student worker, as an executive assistant or administrative assistant. And anyone who's following a track, an executive assistant, administrative assistants, those are project managers. Hands down, those people are project managers. They might be called administrative assistant, but that person literally is a project manager. They are managing multiple projects multiple times. And so I spent 4 years of school doing that. And so coming into a nonprofit and having that, I already knew how to be organized. And so I wasn't nervous about that part. I wasn't nervous about working with kids because I've worked with kids. And so for me, I didn't even realize I had the transferable skills until that happened. I had a mentor who was like, if you can do this, you can do that. Like, these things are the same. I'm like, oh, okay, this is great. When it came to jumping into higher education, it really was a move dealing with, at that time, entry level higher education was paying more than a lot of the nonprofits that I was around. They were smaller nonprofits. They were struggling financially, and that's stressful for me. If the company is struggling with money, I don't like that.
Right.
So
we don't want broke companies here. Fair.
It don't make me feel good. And when I was in undergrad and I was working in an office job and I was helping out with projects and stuff like that, it was someone there that was like, you can work here, you can be here forever. And I'm like, who wants to be in school forever? Even if you pay me? No, thank you. And I reached out to him and it was like, tell me more about being in school forever. Like, tell me more about working for a university. Because it was like, when I was working that job, I started seeing a lot of the similarities that I did with the office work, especially being like a student leader and planning things and planning trips and planning trainings. And he was my supervisor when I was in that role. And I was like, tell me more. And he really was able, I feel like mentorship is so awesome. And it doesn't have to be, we meet once a month and have our little lunch. It's those people that you can reach back to and say, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but can we have a conversation? And he was absolutely open to have that conversation. And it was almost a say less situation. And I was out there applying for higher ed positions. And sure enough, I ended up with a grant sponsored program. I just came from grants, and I was managing a program and I was launching a new program. And that's what I did. Like I said, that first job, they had just got a grant. It was a lot of stuff they were supposed to be doing. It was a new grant. And so again, it wasn't me realizing what was transferable. It was the person that I had a conversation with. I was in school at this time and I was like, hey, can I just intern to get some experience? And she was like, tell me about yourself. And I was like, well, I'm doing this now and I would like to get into higher ed and I'm in school. And she heard it all. I was just telling a story of what I did. And so she's like, yeah, you can start. She started me in like 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, I guess I got to fill out some paperwork.
Right.
And it was a different time where you could just walk up on someone and be like, hey, we're talking steel paper applications, dating myself. There were steel paper applications happening during this time. And so so when she brought me in and it's like, okay, what I'm going to work on, she's like, well, I actually want you to launch this program.
Wow.
It's like, oh yeah, I've launched a program before. Cool. She's like, yeah, and I want you to launch it in like 4 weeks. And I did. I came, I saw, I conquered. I launched that program in 4 weeks and I did the thing. But for me telling her what I've done, for me having my little resume in my hand and us sitting down and having that conversation, and it's a program that she's actually been trying to launch for 8 months and she just couldn't get her staff to do it. And it was like, oh, you got the skills.
The skills,
and so
yeah.
My first 2 times transitioning, it wasn't even me realizing that I had the skill set and I had these transferable skills. It was like, well, let's see if they'll take a chance on me. And I was fortunate enough in that space to be able for them to see it because they really had a need. And so they're like, oh, she checks the boxes of my need. And I was high energy and young and charismatic, and they're like, come on down, girlfriend. I was into doing more work and pay less. As long as you're going to let me go pick my baby up from school and she ain't there until 7 o'clock, baby, I am in here giving you what you need. And so my first 2 times, it was actually someone recognizing it in me. And I think that speaks to that mentorship part. And that speaks to like, you can't be on an island because sometimes you don't realize what you have and what's transferable till you start having those conversations. So it might just be having a conversation with a friend or someone who is in that industry already. And you're like, hey, can I just have a conversation with you? This is what I do. This is what I've done. Do you think that it will move easily into this space here? Do I have that? Or do I need to learn more, get more experience to come into this space?
I love that, and because I was going to ask you about mentorship kind of later on, but you bring up a good point. It sounds like sometimes we may not see what we have for ourselves, right? We're either our own worst critic or we're thinking too small for ourselves. But as you shared with someone or you share with people in your network, they're seeing skills within you that it's like, hey, this would easily transfer here or here. And I love the fact that people are willing to open the door for you, not even just tell you, hey, this would work. It's like that's why mentors are important, because it's one thing to have a conversation with a random individual, but people who are invested in your success and want to help you and so forth, they can provide that insight, but also then actually open the door. And hopefully then I think for all your future opportunities, you were able to kind of think a little bit bigger for yourself, right? And say, hey, I could actually do this. So no, I love that. I love that concept. And so we also talked a little bit about this with the mentorship was around networking. Were there any people that you also talked to when it came to anyone who had a similar career path, or people who had made similar transitions from, whether it was higher ed to government or teaching to nonprofit? Were you able to talk to any folks in between as you were making, besides your mentors?
Yes, I did. I actually took advantage of my alumni network.
Oh,
And
wow.
so during this time, a lot of alumni networks had LinkedIn accounts. And so being alumni, you can join their LinkedIn account. And so I actually would go into it's not during a time when I actually transitioned. It's during a time when I was thinking about transitioning to something different.
Okay.
And I put a message out in the network and was like, hey, can I meet with someone to have this conversation? I was thinking about corporate social responsibility to see what this looks like. Is it possible? And people were like, when you want to meet, when you want to have lunch, when you want to do things. And this was when I graduated from DePaul, and that alumni network is, when people see DePaul on my car, sometimes they're like beeping the horn, like, what degree did you get? This degree. They really love the affinity they have for that school is really strong. And so, and alumni, a young person reaching out, they were just like, absolutely, I'll talk to you, and I'm going to pay for lunch and tell you and look at your resume and things like that. I graduated from some other schools that I'm not gonna mention them, but they don't give me that same experience.
It wasn't the same reception.
It
Okay.
wasn't the same, like loads of people trying to connect and help out and things like that. So that was really great sitting for me. I love to hear others' experiences too, because that helps me to be like, I don't think I want to do that.
Yeah.
And I like to gauge multiple people experiences, because you're just trying to figure it out, type of thing. And so absolutely, I have talked to, not necessarily for my transition that I had. I've had people in those spaces that are in those spaces that I can reach and talk to that I know personally, but just kind of like broadly reaching out to someone to gauge their path, the trajectory, and to see if I'm on the right path and to help me get there. I have absolutely used my alumni network in order to do that, and it has benefited me.
And I love the fact that you said you used your alumni network. Sometimes when we talk about networking, I feel like it's always like a grassroots effort, right? You got to send cold DMs or cold emails. It's like, hi, I'm so and so, right? And it seems very canned and transactional, and you feel like you're starting fresh. But it sounds like, especially for DePaul, where it's like you had a built-in warm network of people who were ready to help you, that you were able to hop right in and say, hey, I need help. Who's willing to talk to me? And so for those who are watching or listening, that, like, tap into the places you already know, your alumni network, your church, your sorority, fraternity, whatever it might be. Tap into places that you already know in order to get some more perspective as to the career transition that you make, so you're not making certain mistakes, or that you can make the process easier on yourself. So I love that. I only got a couple more questions for you, so that we can, before we wrap up this evening. What would you say was the toughest hurdle that you encountered in any of your transitions? Like, when you think back to all the moves that you've made, what was the toughest hurdle, and how did you overcome it?
So in my early transitions, um, moving from nonprofits to higher ed and back to higher ed, I call it zigzagging back and forth. I was really fortunate in those instances. I did not have a hurdle. But this last transition, with coming from higher ed, where I'm like, I'm just fatigued. I can't, I have 10, 15, I've done every position you could possibly think of in higher ed. Like, I could literally go apply to be a VP right now. I've done every position. This last transition, my hurdle was getting over myself. Um,
Mm.
Inflation is crazy and we all need money. And we know these companies are tight. They don't want to pay. And I was at a point in my life, in my work experience, because granted, I've been working professionally for 20 years. um, and really just making decisions based on what makes motherhood easily. And now my kids are big. And so that doesn't have to be my top priority when I'm making a decision. And so my biggest hurdle was getting over myself because my top priority was making money, but I also didn't want to manage people. And
Right.
some of the things that I was swirling around my head, what I wanted to do, because can I go and learn some tech stuff and go be a tech person and make good money and not manage people? Absolutely. Do I want to do that at my age? Absolutely not. You're gonna have to take these skills that I have, baby. You're gonna have to take what I got. And so, knowing the skills that I have and knowing what I wanted to do, it was my hurdle was getting over myself because I was in a spot where, well, I'm not applying to that because that's not enough money, but I'm not applying to that because they want me to manage people. And so
Mm.
I was in a real funky situation where now it gets to the point I'm almost not applying to anything, or I'm just on LinkedIn doing random quick apply, and not really putting any effort into anything. And I call it my coming to Jesus moment to be like, hey, one, how much money do you really need? Because the sky's the limits is wonderful. We all want, money raining down from the heavens, like, oh, this is great. But I had to have that real conversation of how much money do you need in your life right now to travel and save and live leisurely and buy the things you want? And can you get that without managing people?
Mm.
And absolutely, from my needs and wants and desires, I can absolutely get that money without managing people. Is that $150,000? Absolutely not. But in the career, in my career trajectory, that includes managing people. So then I had to make a choice where either I'm going to take my skills and manage a team and have $150,000, or I'm going to take my skills and not manage a team and be under $150,000, but still have all the money that I need to take care of all the things that I need.
Right.
And so I really had to have that conversation. I had to get over myself. And so that was my biggest hurdle. It wasn't, the job applications are crazy and things like that. My biggest hurdle was getting over myself. And then once I did that, um Julia, you were great. You got my resume all the way together. You checked me real good with career coaching. So that wasn't a hurdle for me. It was like, girl, get your life, get it right. Because I was coming from a higher ed space and they like a lot of fluff. And so that wasn't a hurdle. The hurdle was me getting over me. And once I got over me and start like actually applying to the things and using that resume and stuff like that, I started getting interviews immediately.
Wow. And I love the fact that you're so honest and candid about that, because too often we talk about the hurdles that are coming. You got to keep applying and we have to reformat the resume and all this other. We talk about those hurdles, but very rarely do we talk about the hurdles that, that we're the hurdle, we're the obstacle, right?
Yes.
We're the people who are standing in our own way of the success and the life that we envision for ourselves. And so, like you said, you had the come to Jesus moment and had to make the decision like, look, I do want this high salary, but I'm not willing to sacrifice the time or whatever it is that I would need to in order to manage people. And that's just not what I want to do at this stage of my career. So making a decision that's saying, hey, I don't want to do that. So if that means I have to take a lower salary, then I just have to get over myself. And so I love the fact that you're so honest and you had that mirror held up to yourself, because I don't think we do that enough. And so for those who are listening, thinking about what's really important to you in your career transition. Is it the money? Is it the lifestyle? Is it some combination? And what are you willing to compromise or sacrifice in order to make sure that the end result is something that you're comfortable with? Because you can chase $150,000, like you said, but if you're doing work that you hate, is it really worth it?
Yeah.
And so you shared so much with us this evening, and I'm just so grateful. But I wanted to ask you one more question.
Of course.
Do you have any final words of advice, for after everything we've covered? Any final words of advice for someone who may be launching into a career transition right now, or maybe struggling with one?
When I first was transitioning, I didn't have to do a lot of research for government because that was my original first love. Remember, I told you I fell in love with that when I was 20, and so I knew what they needed and wanted. So, like I said, once I started applying for government jobs, it was like phone call, phone call, phone call. And so my advice would be, one, do your research and do realistic research, because a lot of the propaganda that's out on the internet is all about high salaries and working from home. Right. And depending on the industry that you are going into, it doesn't look like the propaganda that's being pushed on the internet. And a lot of people are not living the lives of the propaganda that's pushed on the internet. So I want to say, during that transition, I would silence all the outside noise. I would do some real research. I would speak to people. If someone is in the position that you want to be in, ask them their story and, how they get there, and then ask them for advice. Like, what are you looking for in someone that you're hiring right now? What should I be doing? And after you do your research and after you gather all this data, I came from higher ed. I love data. I came from nonprofits. After you gather all this data, then you have to be real with yourself. One of my transitions I thought I was going to make was going to be a project manager for corporate. I have 2 masters, and one of my masters is in management and organizational behavior. And a lot of our work dealt with project management, strategic planning, everything that's in a PMP. A PMP is really just sitting for the test and showing that I can manage a project. Well, my resume said I can manage a project, but some positions they were using the PMP just to weed people out. At this point in my life, I'm not paying money. I'm not, I got too much. I will not. And so my realistic conversation is, yes, I can apply to anything that says PMP preferred, but I also have to understand there's over 100,000 people that have PMPs. And sometimes if it comes down to me and them even getting an interview, they love that sheet of paper and they are going to go with that person. So my realistic conversation is, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I'm going to apply. But I understand that unless I decide to get that PMP behind my name, it's going to box me out of some opportunities. And I don't want to go get that. And so being realistic with myself and not every day applying to a job that says PMP required, PMP preferred, and then I'm crying to Julia like, your resume not working. It's like, but girl, what are you doing? And so when you are doing your research, then you have to be realistic with yourself. Yep. What you have to have that conversation with yourself. Do I have the transferable skills, and do I have the education requirements, and am I willing to get it? And if the answer is no, then you're gonna have to make another choice. And that's just what it is. And so for me, it was like, you know what, my kid's big. Let me see what my first love is talking about. And now that I'm coming with 20 years of work experience, and it's grants, it's work that I've done before, I don't have to stay and see. I'm not coming in at the bottom. I don't have to. I'm coming in at a higher level, because it's like, oh, she's done this. And so a lot of even the training, it was like, oh, you've done this. I was like, yeah, I know how to do this already. And I was like, and this is actually a shortcut. They're like, oh, I was like, yeah, I've been in these streets. I've been in these grant management streets. And so for me, it was perfect for me. But my advice to anyone is to do their research, have real conversations with real people that's like out there, really in the field, that you know that's working where you want to work, and not just the company. Like, oh my God, I want to work at Google. Look at the work, like the work that they're doing, and have that conversation, and then have a real conversation with yourself. Are you really prepared to make this transition? And are you willing to get there if you're not prepared yet?
I love that, and I just one thing I just wanted to say before we end is, thinking about, like you said, the transferable skills and looking at that, and making sure that you're not going to set yourself up for failure, right? As we've talked about, you had certain skills that were able to transition, but you may not have the certifications or something that they may be looking for, and it's okay to say, hey, at this stage in my life, this is not what I want to do. And so just using the skills that you have and pushing forward with that. So
it's so important, Julia, because Julia also is going to get you together on your LinkedIn, which my LinkedIn still looks sorry. Don't go look at it. But my hitter during the time when I thought I wanted to be, that I wanted to be project management, specifically had a project management in the hitter. And when I had this real conversation with myself, and I was like, for the last 20 years, I have been working with a grant. No matter what job, I've been working with a grant or managing $20-30 million worth of grants as a grant accountant. When I began to look at that, and I was like, I don't mind managing grants. I actually like that. And I put grant management in my hitter, the way my DMs and emails started hopping on LinkedIn was absolutely insane.
wow.
So it's just, and that's just me putting it in a hitter. I didn't change anything below about my experience. That was me, but I had project management in my hitter. I didn't have PMP, but however, they was just pulling that, because every job is like, manage the grant, manage the grant, manage a grant, manage 20 million, manage federal, manage this. And those recruiters for grant management, once that switched in that headline, it's like it drew them to my page, and they were I didn't realize how many corporations actually had grant coordinators. I'm like, oh, this might be another option later on in life. But yeah. That is, yes to the transferable skills, absolutely, and being that realistic with yourself.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Cheronda. If anybody wants to get in contact with you to learn more about your experience, how can people connect with you?
I am online as I can't remember what I'm online as. That's so horrible. This is how old I am.
It happens.
You can send me an email, because I'm thinking of people who like maybe have questions about working in nonprofits or working in higher ed or working for government, because I've touched all three of those industries. You can absolutely send me an email. It's going to be cme@cherondae.com. You can send me an email and ask me a question. I will gladly answer those questions that you have.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time this evening. And thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Such a rich conversation about how you can leverage your transferable skills and how you can make a successful career transition. Join us back on Monday for our solo episode. We'll have a new topic to share. We'll hopefully see you then. Thank you.
Bye.